Webinar on collaborative governance for just urban transitions and how to build public civil society partnerships. In this webinar, we will have 3 short interventions by Daniel on introducing the ACCTING project and the pilot project specifically. Then we have Nikos Zaharis from the Southeast European Research Center to present some ACCTING recommendations, specifically the fact sheet on public civil society partnerships for behavioral change. And then we have Sophia Silverton, also from ICLEI, to offer her reflection and presentations from other projects, and also specifically on insights and tips shared by community-led initiatives and local governments. We will then close with the second half with discussions where all of you are, of course, very welcome to join. So you can already jot down your thoughts and questions and also experiences, insights to share with us. As you realize, we are recording the presentation. So if you don't want to be recorded, you can, of course, also turn off your camera during that time, and then are encouraged to put it back on for the discussion if you want. So I'm handing over to my colleague, Daniel.
Thanks so much, Janis. Yeah, exactly. Hi, everyone. I'm Daniel Buerta. I'm from ICLEI and was heavily involved in the ACCTING project with a focus on the pilot actions. So what I wanted to do today was to briefly talk you through some of the successes, challenges, and lessons learned from the 10 ACCTING pilots, and then to help think through what this means for partnerships with local governments. So if we go to the next slide, Janis. Yeah, so for those who don't know a little bit about ICLEI, we're a non-profit organization working on sustainable development processes, always at the city or local level. And usually that is with local and regional governments. But in the case of ACCTING, we've done it slightly differently. So if you go to the next slide. Yeah, so in ACCTING, the ethos of the project in general was around leveraging the sort of really exciting work that community-led initiatives are already doing on inclusive and sustainable change in different localities across Europe. So if we look at the 3 major project objectives, there's a whole lot about analyzing and understanding and empowering policymakers to basically understand individual and collective behavioral change and what's stopping people from making more sustainable decisions. And then finally, to sort of co-create and design different solutions that take account of these insights. So what we did with the pilot actions was we developed basically 10 interesting concepts of ideas that would work well, hopefully. And then we put out a call for different civil society organizations to apply to run these as pilot projects over the course of 2024. If we go to the next slide, Janis. Yeah, exactly. So basically there were 10 selected pilot projects, 8 of them linked to like a specific theme like food or mobility, and then 2 looking more cross-cuttingly at volunteering. So if we skip through the pilots quickly, yeah, we have on wildfire resilience, biodiversity loss, energy communities, skipping through, small business enterprises, community gardens, cycling, food and schools, and then the 2 on climate activism and volunteering. If we go next slide. Basically, the pilot actions ran for the whole of 24, and we have had the chance now to do this big analysis of what we really found from this process, sort of commonalities across the different pilots. And what we identified were 2 major bottlenecks. So the one was funding, and we've already done a webinar on this. And this is the second one on the question of support by and from local governments. And it's important to note here that this is not a question of blame. It's just that we see that basically pilot actions really need support from local governments, because otherwise they just hit a glass ceiling where they can't progress further. So we want to talk a bit about, I'll start off by talking about what our findings are from the pilot actions specifically for what was most effective. Then Nikos will talk a little bit about the project as a whole, what has worked. And then we will bring my colleague Sophia in to talk about her findings from other projects on this topic. So if we skip on, Yanis. Yeah, basically, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but basically when we looked across all of the reporting from the different pilot actions, we made a list of common challenges, successes, and learnings, and then we clustered these, and we saw in all three cases. So with the challenges, there were these challenges around public sector support. If we skip to the learnings, there were a huge number. I think, in fact, the most interesting learnings were about the importance of collaboration with municipal actors, but also, again, what really worked in this regard. And then finally, on the successes, there was also some questions about public institutionalization. So how pilot actions had persuaded municipal actors to take up the pilot that they had started. So if we dive in a bit deeper, if we start with successes, here I'll talk a little bit about sort of why this approach really works, why the sort of approach of localizing the Green Deal through working with civil society organizations, why it's important, but also for those who agree it's important, how one might go about doing this. So in terms of what really worked, we saw that it was a very effective way of including vulnerable groups. So there's this maxim, nothing about them without them. Here, I would bring up the example of the co-creation of strategies for wildfires in Greece in rural villages. And what we saw here was that the involvement of these villages from these very rural areas who would never normally have been involved in fire prevention planning, it unearthed a whole lot of like really insightful local knowledge about historical fire patterns, local terrains, water sources, etc. So we see that really there's this possibility to learn a lot more than local governments often know on topics at hand. Then a related topic is this question of empowerment. So if we stay with the wildfires example, it wasn't just about tapping into these local villages, understanding from them what the local terrain and the needs were, but also identifying, co-planning with them, like what really were the most effective ways for what could the municipality take on in times of fires, and what were the specific roles that people in the community and the villages could do, and providing training for them, for instance. So there's the sense of empowerment and kind of co-ownership of climate policies that turned out to be very effective. Linking to this is really this translation of Green Deal policies to lived realities. So often we see that civil society groups, because they have these stakeholders that they work with, these particular groups. So in particular pilot actions, it might be students in high schools or vulnerable micro entrepreneurs, or a lot of them had these specific target groups. They had a really good understanding of what these groups, how they thought and what their needs were. So it was a very effective way of, there's a lot of high level policy that doesn't really reach the ground and doesn't really affect the lived realities of people on the ground. And this was a really effective way of providing all kinds of very tailored support and project work together with these kind of different stakeholders. As part of this, there was this question of civil society organizations as mediators. So a lot of the pilot actions developed very successful online platforms that allowed different stakeholders to engage very effectively. So in some cases, it was small businesses. Other times, like for instance, with the case of our pilot action on community gardens, it was about linking to other smaller community gardens all across the country, providing them, like making them understand that they were not alone, that they could support one another. And quite often there was also this question of, even linking to the municipality. So if we take the example of the wildfires, it was a whole cluster of remote villages that together could be linked and could also be linked to the municipality. In terms of the question of the public institutionalization of pilot approaches, so convincing the municipality to take up these pilot projects, sometimes it worked really well and sometimes it didn't. In terms of what we think were quite effective ways of doing this, like success factors, obviously there's this tapping into public priorities. So for instance, again, wildfires in Greece is something that municipalities know they need to prioritize. Then it's also about a windows of opportunity and linking to wider discussions. So some pilots working on food, for instance, made a very effective link to topics around resilience, which are, again, a much bigger topic of discussion often. And there's a lot of projects and funding for them. And finally, we saw a lot of leverage of existing relationships between political actors and pilots. So really speaks to the sort of importance of this ongoing relationship in this regard. If I turn to the challenges and lessons learned, so basically the challenges very, very stark here. A lot of pilot actions weren't able to progress because they didn't receive the government permission that they needed to do certain things. So sometimes this was linked to a problem of they might have support from one level of government, but with a topic like, for instance, the pilot on energy communities, there is energy is a sort of shared competency across local, regional, and national actors. So sometimes there's a challenge across different governmental levels, but especially the issue was often with like civil societies being based in specific municipalities and needing permission from that municipality. And they struggled there. In terms of the lessons that really came out, we see particularly around resilience topics, there's a real need to take up this approach grounded in resilience and dialogue, rather than this kind of static planning for the future. You need to have constant engagement, just because conditions are more and more volatile, and it's just things change too fast. So municipalities need to involve sort of local communities more. We saw quite clearly that there were different ways that municipalities can support civil society organizations. So in one way, there's this institutionalization uptake of what the pilot actions are doing. And in other ways, there's this providing complementary actions. So here quite clearly was often building infrastructure that supports the work of, say, a bicycle lane to support the work of a cycling organization. We saw that involvement of educational actors is repeatedly a very successful approach generally. So that's sort of high schools and universities often. And working through curriculum is really a way of building in and taking this beyond a pilot approach. And finally, we see that there were different kinds of civil society organizations that could help in different ways. So some of them might be very small, grassroots, understand the needs of their stakeholders and benefit from a lot of trust. And then others are more like network organizations that are well capacitated and can make this link to, for instance, municipalities and business. Yes, thanks so much. I think that's my last slide.
Thanks a lot, Daniel. Maybe Nikos, you want to take over right away?
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks everybody for being here with us today. As Daniel said, acting is reaching its final month now. We had these 10 pilots, and we learned a lot through them. I think they were really very interesting cases, and a lot of cases came up the issue of how to enhance partnerships between different actors. So between public sector, research, civil society, industry, and so on. And we have several recommendations. Actually, we have 13 fact sheets in the acting website where you can go and see them. And one of them is focusing particularly on public civil society partnership for behavioral change. And I'm going to very briefly explain what our suggestions are, and then we can discuss about it. Can you go to the next? Yes. So the problem, the acting vision. I mean, what was the project's vision? We try to address a problem of how to advocate behavioral change and promote inclusion of vulnerable populations in the European Green Deal. And we have several, let's say, insights and answers to that. There are three main elements. One is we have to have local knowledge and to enhance local actions. The second one is we have to emphasize commons, to understand commons as the resources accessible to everyone, and to go beyond the public and private ownership of things, but to resources that are accessible to everyone, and to emphasize local level partnerships. So as I said, I'm going to talk now about local level partnerships for local government and civil society. Next slide, please, Yanis. So The challenges, some of them Daniel already talked about. So local authorities, a lot of times they lack themselves funding, they lack skills, lack staff, they lack knowledge, although they have a lot of knowledge themselves. On the other side, we have civil society organizations who work at the community level, who know the needs of the communities, who talk with the communities, and they have the local knowledge. But a lot of times they face regulatory obstacles. They face communication hurdles, and they don't know how to speak to local authorities and how to do things that can be done in the let's say way of operations of local authorities. So we need to find a way for them to collaborate in a more systematic and strategic way, because not collaborating misses the opportunity of combining community knowledge and governance resources in order to solve these problems. If we can go to the next slide. So a systematic cooperation, we see that it is rare, but it is essential in order to build trust between the local government and the civil society organizations. And trust is the sole, let's say, quality that can unlock all the other possibilities. And we have several very good examples from the 10 pilot projects that I can give some examples later in the questions, where this cooperation, this building of trust has bring some very positive results. So in order to let's say summarize our recommendation, go to the next slide. We want to build bridges for climate actions between public society and public governance and civil society. And we think that in order to do that, we have to share a common vision. We have to have a strategic approach. We have to use tools for engaging citizens and civil society, and we have to always have in our mind the sustainability of our efforts, not one-off efforts, but efforts that can lead to sustainability. So vision first in the next slide. The first thing that we have to do is to have a shared vision. So we need to co-create a vision rooted in equity and justice. We have to link global climate goals with local realities. As I said before, build trust, respect civic space, and foster transparency. And in order to build trust, we have to, the two sides, to try to understand the limitations and the opportunities from the other side. It is very important. And we have also to encourage citizen participation, long-term engagement, and emphasize the two main elements of this cooperation, which is systematic and strategic. And when we say systematic and strategic, it's important to have an open dialogue and to have a cooperation, even when we don't actually, let's say, operate something. Even if there is no problem to solve, even if there's nothing, or there are always problems, of course, but there's no urgency, let's say. So we have to have a constant dialogue. We don't want to cooperate only, when the fire is on and we have to put out the fire. Next slide, Yannis. So the strategic approach, our recommendations are towards local authorities and civil society organizations. So for the local authorities, we recommend to establish clear communication channels and focal points, to invest in facilitation and co-creation of skills with within their own authorities, to promote flexibility, transparency, and reward innovation, to avoid duplication and bureaucracy, focus on community outcomes. So we know, of course, that the local authorities, they have their own rules, they have their bureaucratic, let's say, thinking, but they have to think creatively on how to overcome that, so that to involve citizens and involve civil society into focusing on community outcomes. On the other hand, the civil society organizations, they have to be transparent and open about their goals and capacity. They have to be ready to share skills and resources. They have to be proactive in bringing forward concerns and potential barriers, and be honest about them, and be also professional in their approach to to this relationship with local authorities. So next slide is use tools for citizen and civil society engagement. There are several tools that anyone can use, and these tools can be chosen from a variety of tools that are better for each situation, from co-creation events, citizen assembly, digital tools, but also use not only digital but non-digital tools in order to involve citizens, because a lot of times digital tools prioritize people who know how to use them. So vulnerable groups that are the focus of this research maybe are not so easy to engage with digital tools. That's why I say prioritize digital and not digital tools. Open up local data for innovation. This is very important for local governments because a lot of times we need to measure things in order to make decisions and to take action. So we have to have local data as open as possible. Involve citizens and in evaluation and oversight of activities. Streamline available funding to support the vision in an accountable and transparent way. And also use this relationship to facilitate fundraising from private sector donors. What we found in one case at least, but also in other cases in the literature, is that private sector donors through corporate social responsibility and so on will find it much easier to invest if they see that there is a good strategic and visionary engagement between local government and civil society. And finally, to end it all, in the next slide, we have always to think about sustainability of our cooperation. So we have to start this cooperation by having into our mind that this has to last in the long term. So in order to do that, we have to move on from one-off efforts to ongoing relationship. As I said, even if the relationship doesn't have an immediate, let's say, problem to address, to involve citizens in a systematic way in policy making and implementation, encourage volunteerism and community agency, and promote long-term awareness of climate challenges and Green Deal goals. So this is, in a nutshell, the policy recommendation on local government and civil society organization cooperation. It's quite more detailed in the fact sheet, so I encourage everybody to go and take a look at it. It's available in the active website, and thank you very much for listening.
Thanks a lot, Nikos, for this very interesting intervention, stressing also the importance of making this kind of sustainable, long-term, trusting, systemic partnerships, as you also call it. I think it's very important. Before we move to our third speaker, Sophia, I'll stop sharing the screen really quick to see, first of all, if there's any question, and then for Sophia to also comment on these presentations. But maybe if there's like a direct question for Nikos or for Daniel, we can also take it now.
I have to raise my hand, or can I just ask?
You can go ahead, please.
We're not that many here, so yeah.
Okay, so Nikos, it's a question to you. You mentioned you would like to provide examples from the 10 pilots about how trust is built and how important that this is really like the important thing, like the glue that keeps people and organizations together. Yeah. I would like to know some examples.
Let me give one example and maybe two. So in Serbia, in our pilot that we did in Belgrade, this organization acts as an intermediate between public and private donors and little small activists and small groups that are informal groups. And they have a very nice solution to the problem that has two aspects. The problem of informal groups acting and needing a small donation is that if you are a public entity, even a private entity, it's very difficult to give donations to individuals, that they don't have a legal entity. So this is actually a trust operation. This is a very well organized organization that has the trust of public and private donors, and they are acting as an intermediaries for informal groups, but not only for transferring the donations, but also for providing mentoring. So we saw when we visited and in their reports how they mentor these small groups. They give them the small donations that allow them to do their activism and the community engagement, but also mentor them in order to move forward. And that's a very, very good example. Another example is here in our city, Paula, in Thessaloniki, Mama Gea, one NGO that works with the municipality in order to create a plan for healthy food in schools, which is a very good example of a CSO bringing in knowledge, activism, enthusiasm that I'm not saying that it's lacking from the municipality, but the municipality always has its structure. Some things are not moving forward very much, but there is a trust between the municipality and the NGO, and they manage to move forward a lot into making this plan for healthy food in schools. So there are other examples also. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Then maybe we're starting the rest of the discussion for later. And Sophia, please come in with your comments and observations.
Okay, thanks, Yanis. And I'm actually going to get back to this topic of trust in just a moment as well, because I find it really interesting. I have a quote written on my whiteboard just here that says, "Trust is the combination of transparency, empathy, and consistency." So I like keeping that just there as a reminder, actually. So it's very appropriate. But just a few words about me, so you know who's speaking right now. I am Sophia Silverton. I'm a colleague of Daniel and Yanis, and I work on topics around justice, equity, and democracy and sustainability, also at ICLEI Europe. But I have been called in today because I have worked outside of the ACCTING project on another initiative that specifically looks at the connection, the collaboration between community-led initiatives and local governments. I facilitated this initiative called Urban Community. We can pop it in the chat later on, but we gave also small grants to community initiatives to carry out, to facilitate interactive processes together with their local governments around the topic of urban sustainability in their city. So I'm going to draw a lot of my reflections, or actually all of my reflections and insights from what I've learned from talking to many, many different community initiatives and local governments over the years. And what I thought might be interesting would be to add my 2 cents to something that Nikos said. Nikos said along these ACCTING findings. So what Nikos went through were 4 of these essential elements for good partnerships between civil society and local governments. And I will just briefly give some insights or some reflections on each one. And starting with this topic of a vision. So you mentioned that it was really important for these groups to have a co-creative vision for how they're going to work together. And yeah, I know it's bad practice to maybe start on a negative note, but I do want to just say that we can acknowledge that it's very challenging sometimes for these groups to create common visions together, because they can have very different ideas for what they want the future of their city or their town, village, whatever, to look like. So they can have different understandings of issues or just different priorities, really, really different priorities. And this can be a good thing because it opens a space for conflict as well, which is a necessary but also challenging part of political processes. So this isn't a reason to not enter into the process of making visions for collaboration, but rather to show how important it is to have a very skilled facilitator who is also neutral as well, who doesn't necessarily come from the community groups, who doesn't necessarily come from the city, but can kind of help them get along a path together. And I've seen examples of this in the Netherlands, actually, of neutral facilitators coming in to help these groups work together. Of course, that takes money, and maybe that's not always present, but it is a nice idea. So there's that's my thought on this idea of creating visions for collaboration together. Then the next thing you had mentioned was this approach that these two groups take. And there was a lot of different bullet points in there, but one thing that I wanted to pick up on was, as I had just mentioned, this topic of transparency and trust and how those two things relate together. Because I've been told specifically by actually a staff member of a municipality here in Germany who works in the environmental department, how important it is to have transparency in order to build trust. So what does this look like? It means sharing what your needs are, what your goals are, what your constraints are, what you just can or cannot do plainly, because it helps set expectations properly and then build understanding when something just is or is not possible. And then the guy that I was talking to, he said this is really important because then the community groups know that it's not just me as the local government staff member not wanting to do something because I'm grumpy, but because we just genuinely don't have the capacities to do that. And so that is really helpful when it comes to these collaborations together to lay that out. So then when it comes to the third element for good cooperation that you're referring to, which was tools for citizen engagement, I won't comment too much on here now, other than to say that there's so many resources out there on this topic. And I'll actually present a toolkit momentarily, which dives into some actionable tips for these processes as well. So I think it complements the acting findings very nicely. And my final reflection on what you have been presenting to us, Nikos, is on this topic of sustainability and more longer term cooperation and the importance of that. And I really, really agree with you on the importance of this and also how it's rare. I mean, in my experience, I've seen that these collaborations are more one-off, which then also leads to reduced trust and just lack of consistent progress, which is unfortunate. But one thing I have been hearing from communities and governments that I've been speaking to is, as you said, the role of relationship building in this process and for encouraging longer term collaboration. And I think it was actually one of the acting pilot projects that said, projects may start and end, but the people remain. And so what I found as well is that when we connect as people, regardless of whether we work for the government or the community initiative, when we have this shared passion for making the city a better place, it encourages deeper connections and more fruitful collaborations. But ideally, these relationships shouldn't be bilateral, because we know people come and go, there's staff turnover, people leave, people move. So to have some deeper connections with a wider variety of people between the two groups. So those are a few of my thoughts on the acting findings, and I think it really echoes a lot of what I've been learning over the years as well. So I was really happy to learn about that. And I have a few more minutes here that I would like to use to present this toolkit that I had just referenced a minute ago, because it dives into, there's extra slides here. Here it is. It dives into some more practicalities around how do we get these groups collaborating together. You can see on the screen just the title page of it. So the topic is collaborative governance for sustainability transitions that are also equitable as well. And on the right-hand side, you can see some of these key questions that we were trying to answer in here. And one of the hosts will probably post a link to this toolkit in the chat later, because I will not present all of it now. But some of the questions that we looked into were, what are concrete participation formats and how do we choose the right one? Or how to facilitate participatory processes. And importantly, referring to what I mentioned earlier about conflict, how do you handle conflict while conducting a participatory process and so on. But for now, today, I would just zoom into one specific part of the toolkit, which gives some insights into very concrete tips for local governments and for community-led initiatives on how to collaborate better. That's the next slide, Yanis. So there it is. This is the question we asked ourselves. And I have, I think, 3 examples for you that we can talk about. The first one here on the screen is advice towards community-led initiatives. And this advice is coming both from a variety of community-led initiatives, but also from local governments as well, who think that this is important. And the first tip is to come prepared, enter into your collaborations prepared. And the founder or the co-founder of Transition Italia said to me that in his experience, the first stages of contact with a local government are crucial. So if you are labeled as the usual complainers who don't understand how the world really works, you won't get very far. And so here, this is just to emphasize the importance of understanding how local governments are organized, what their key policy priorities are, what they can and cannot do, and being aware of how your goals as a community initiative align with their goals as a municipality. And having this from the beginning will really influence the level of good quality relationship and trust that you have, that you share together. So that's the first tip, directed at community groups. Now, the second one is also directed at community groups, and I do really like it because it shows that the scales aren't so tipped in a sense. So like in these collaborations, often the local governments are seen as having a lot of power, and I think this is the case, but this tip is to show that community groups have so much value, and it's important for them to know this and to demonstrate it as well when they present themselves for collaboration opportunities with cities. Again, I had a municipal climate protection manager say to me that collaboration is a win for their department because they don't actually have to look anywhere for people to do work with them. Here are the people, the community groups, who have similar goals or the same goal. They have professional expertise and really important good quality networks, local networks. No agency would have the networks that these civil society groups have. So this just goes to show that community groups have a lot of value to offer, and that although this is not always recognized by some local governments, it is really the case, and it can be something that is demonstrated, that is embraced a little bit more to bring forth their value as that they have. So that's the second tip. I have one tip at the end also for local governments. And then that is on the next slide, Yanis. Perfect. So the tip for local governments, we have more in the toolkit, but the one I wanted to emphasize was this aspect of funding schemes, because of course money is important, but not just funding, to make it fairly simple, fairly unbureaucratic, and to pair it with a bit of support. So the importance of this is that, yeah, funding is good, but you can't just give it and then say hands off and walk away. In order to build up community groups into really proficient partners for municipalities, it can be helpful to have some guidance from local government staff as well to help with a bit of professionalization, because some community groups can be a bit informal and could benefit from that assistance as well. So what this might look like is demonstrated in the quote on the screen as well. And what this means is to take a bit of time to listen to what this community group wants, but to also importantly know what you want as a city, as a department, and to then discuss what the collaboration framework and outputs will look like. And ideally, you can start with small projects, see how it goes, and keep doors open for growth in the future. So these were some tips that I've heard from local governments and from community initiatives, and we have some examples of that as well. So those are just a few things. I think I'm more or less, I will leave it at that for now, but there's much more in the toolkit. And I would end by just saying, I think this topic of collaboration is really interesting and really important and extremely challenging. But as I've heard from different various people, that it's essential to do this because there is no way of creating the change we need for sustainability transitions if you don't touch on all the different ways of organizing society. So I'm very happy that we can take the time to talk about it today. And yeah, thanks for your attention, and we can have a nice discussion now. Back to you, Yannis, Daniel.
Thanks a lot, Sophia. Round of applause for her and all of our speakers. Thanks for these very also insightful quotes that you share with us. I think that's always great to really hear from the people that are really implementing these kind of partnerships also in their own words, so to say. So now we have time for some exchange after these three great presentations. This means on the one hand, of course, questions, but then also as an open question to all of us, if you have any kind of insights and experiences that you want to share on how to build these public civil society partnerships in effective and long-term ways, then please feel free to come in, and I will stop recording and stop sharing for exchange. So thanks a lot.